My brother was diagnosed with and died of leukemia in 23 days. And that was really the moment that everything changed. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life in the rat race. And I looked at my phone and I answered it. And it was Simon Dunmore. And he said, "Do you want a job?" And I said, "Well, one day I'd like to run the company." And he said, "What about now?"
2, 1, roll it.
This is StoryCo, the podcast about the business of story and storytelling. I'm James Kirkham. Let's get into it. My guest today spent 12 years in finance, a rising star at the likes of Deutsche Bank, got married with 2 children before he was 22. Then his brother was diagnosed with leukemia and died within 23 days. That's when Wes returned to music. He's now the CEO and chairman of Defected Records, but the appetite started years before that. Wez Saunders is the man who cold emailed Simon Dunmore at Defected with a pitch dressed up as a request for mentorship, walked out of a 2-hour meeting being told he could sell a pen, and was offered a job in bed 2 days afterwards. Within 4 years, he was managing director. He'll tell you that since 2021, Defected have put on 1,033 events outside our Ibiza and sold out 951 of them. And he'll tell you that the through line of all of it, the virtual festivals during COVID that reached tens of millions, the charity arm, the duty of care, is just one word: community. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. Wez Saunders, welcome to StoryCo. Tell me a story.
I'm a child of the 80s, and it was ironic how I kind of really got into ultimately dance music. And when my dad used to bring records home and play them to us all the time. And in 86, he brought home Mars, Pump Up the Volume, and he would sit us down and he would say, "This is Eric B. and Rakim, this is James Brown," talk about samples. And all of a sudden I was like fascinated by this sample aspect of music, because up until that point, and I was just a kid, right? It was an era of new romantic, but all of a sudden there was this electronic music and I was quite fascinated by this. So fast forward a few years, 1990-ish, my parents bought me a Sony Walkman for Christmas, and it had a radio and a tape deck. And I opened it. Father Christmas used to bring our presents and leave them in our bedroom. And I went to walk down the stairs and I dropped the tape deck. This is like 10 minutes after opening it. Back then, the parents were like, "Well, you've broken it, so that's tough." All I could tune into was Kiss FM. It was a legal radio station at the time, just before it became a legal station. And I, unbeknowingly, at the time, it wasn't until 2 or 3 years later that I started realising that some of the people I was listening to was like Roger Sanchez and Trevor Mad Hatter Nelson and like Colin Dowell and others that had residencies on Kiss. But I was listening to dance music. And then, of course, rave culture in the UK started to grow. So we were listening to hardcore, into jungle. And then from jungle, that evolved into progressive house. And then with progressive house started to create these derivatives of house music that were already in existence, but we hadn't been exposed to them properly. It was around that time that I started to DJ. My parents bought us decks in 1994 for Christmas, but what had been happening is my cousins who were DJs had been passing records to us that they didn't like because they'd become too cheesy for them. Records like Joe Smooth Promised Land and loads of Trax records and Marshall Jefferson stuff, and pushed the feeling on. And there was a number of records that were just sat in my collection that I hadn't played because I wasn't really into it. I said, "Dad, I can't mix jungle." He said, "Have you tried those other records? Just like 4/4. I'll try those." I started trying to mix house music, and I could mix it. I could hear the 4 beats, I could match the beats, and I got into house music. And then I DJ'd our school leaving party, and I just started blagging my way into DJing. I was just telling people I could DJ, and I'd done things I hadn't done. No one cared back then. It was just like, "Oh, right, okay, I'll believe you." And it was allowing us. And I started playing for clubs and events here and there, and then started to take it more seriously. My mates were all working at McDonald's and JD Sports, and I was DJing weddings and christenings for like 650 quid a pop, earning more in one night than they were in like a whole month of working. I thought, I could make some money out of this. So then I started to try to DJ professionally, and it wasn't as easy as the weddings and christenings, I'm afraid. Like, you getting paid to play back then was difficult, and you had to sell tickets or bring a crowd, and we'd be playing events and bringing a crowd with us. And then late 90s, my wife fell pregnant with my daughter. She was born in 99, my son in 2002, and we were married with 2 kids by the age of 22. As my wife was pregnant with my daughter, my mother-in-law had suggested I find a real job, and I started working for Deutsche Bank. In the summer of 99, I started working for Bankers Trust, who were later merged with Deutsche Bank. I was on fast track to directorship in the company, promoted every 2 years I was there. And then in the summer of 2008, my brother was diagnosed with and died of leukemia in 23 days. And that was really the moment that everything changed.
My gosh, that's such a huge thing to deal with at that age. I can't even imagine. You're such a baby at 28 anyway. And then to lose him in just 23 days obviously feels so sudden. Where did that leave you?
His death just turned my life upside down. So what I decided very quickly was that I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life in the rat race. I'd gone to work one day and I remember we'd raised about 365 grand for various children with cancer and leukemia charities off the back of his death. And that was really keeping me going and stopping me spiraling with grief and depression. When that stopped, it just gave me time to really think about what I wanted from my life. And I didn't want to work in a financial institution for the rest of my life. I could see how quickly it was taken away from my brother, and I decided that actually I wanted to go back into music. I spoke to my manager, who very kindly insinuated, without making promises, that as program manager, if at the end of the program there wasn't a job for me, that they'd have no choice but to make me redundant. I'd been a good staff member for 12 years. The day before my 30th birthday, they made me redundant. And the day after, I had acquired a small record label called Endemic Digital. And this is back in 2010 now. And I had decided to re-enter the music industry.
I'm really interested in what music had done in those 12 years. It felt like it hadn't really left you, right? Like, tell us a bit about that feeling. Was it always there?
Throughout my entire time at Deutsche Bank, I'd spent most of my evenings cataloguing my records, ripping my 15,000 records to MP3s and WAVs, selling some of them to keep our head above water at times that we needed to, and buying them back later in life. Really? All my spare time, either watching West Ham or cataloguing my music of some sort. So music had been kind of right at the centre of my life for as far back as I can remember.
That's quite the about turn, isn't it? Like walking back into music in that way. Did it feel natural? Was it like a welcome return, or did you think, what on earth have I done here?
When I started my own label, I started to work with certain artists that were my heroes, right? Terry Farley, Rocky, Colin Dell, Onions, like people that I really respected, was able to get records out. We're getting played on Radio 1 and DJs like Jamie Jones at the early stages of his career. There was a lot of good things happening. But the way that independent music occurred back then is you would get paid on a quarterly basis. When I got that first paycheck at the end of November 2010, it was £265. And I was like, fuck, how am I going to feed my family, right? At this time, my children in 2010 were 8 and 11. And I'm like, oh my God, Christmas around the corner, what am I going to do? So I was like, right, I can't survive on one record label. Obviously, it ended up going on to make more money than 265 quid in 3 months. But I designed an ecosystem. So I started a new label. Endemic Digital was very much a deep house. I started one that was like designated to traditional house music, somewhat funky house, and a label called Form and Function, which actually was like Hot Creations and Form and Function in the early days. Were like Resident Advisor's top 2 labels for a while.
Tell us a little bit more about that first meeting and this kind of introduction to Simon's company. And he's quite a renowned, legendary figure in house music and dance culture. But from that first meeting to running the company feels miles apart. Tell us a bit about that.
This is fast forward to 2013 now, 3 years after leaving the bank. And I'd written a record that I sent into Defected Records to Simon Dunmore for consideration for Soul Heaven, which was a label that Defected controlled. Simon politely declined the record, but I'd connected with Simon by this point. So I was just sat at home one night, just like shortly after Storm Queen, the MK mix of Storm Queen was #1 on Defected in the UK, Defected Ministry. And I'd been reading a little bit about Defected and Simon. I obviously knew Defected as a label, but I didn't really understand the people behind the business at this stage. And I'd obviously been introduced to Simon. I learned a little bit more about him, and I kind of felt I was a bit of a glass ceiling with what I was doing myself. So I wrote to Simon Dunmore. I wrote an email to him to say, you know, this is who I am, this is what I've done. Explained the label suite, explained my finance background, explained the managing artist, explained everything I was doing. And he invited me in for a meeting under the premise that we were having a discussion to get some guidance and mentorship. And it was around the time Wolf of Wall Street came out. We were sat down, we were talking, and it was quite a while. And Simon's time's super precious. I don't know. I was in there for about 2 hours, and I don't think that's an over-exaggeration, or that gets longer every time I tell this story, I'm pretty sure. But Simon said, I believe you could sell me this pen. And I was like, what's he talking about? I think I'm a blagger kind of thing. And he's like, no, you just like convincing in your kind of ways. And obviously he respected my musical knowledge. He respected my organisation skills, my finance background, the sort of way I guess I articulated myself. It was a good meeting. I took some bite-sized chunks from it. I thought it was quite useful, gave me some ideas on things I should stop doing and things I can carry on doing in it. 2 days later, I was laying in bed, and I don't answer numbers I don't have saved on my phone. I never have done. And I also turn my phone on airplane mode if I'm asleep. And particularly if I'm actually sick, I'm like, then it's completely no-go zone. And for some reason, I had like a chest infection, and my phone wasn't on airplane mode, and it started to ring with a number that was unknown. And I looked at my phone and I answered it, and it was Simon Dunmore. And he said, do you want a job? I said, what is the job? And he said, club promotions manager. I said, I'm not a club promoter. He said, no, I need you to get Defected Records played by club DJs. I'm thinking, hang on a minute, like Defected by this time is 15 years old, like it's one of the best labels in Britain. I'm like, you're going to pay me to do that? Yeah, I can do that. I said, yes. And he said, look, but you've got to stop doing all of the things that you're doing, and it's a full-time job. I sold off my labels to other partners and kind of handed off things to other people.
So club promotions to managing director in what, 3-4 years-ish? Tell us a bit about that transition. That feels huge. What were you doing? What were you seeing? What were you sensing during that time?
Defected was outsourcing the radio plug-in of records, but I felt that the club promotions and the radio plugin kind of went hand in hand. So I'd suggested that I take on the responsibility, and we were working with companies like Listen Up and Your Army. I started to take on those responsibilities and plug our records as well as club promotions. The radio producer had resigned shortly after I joined, and I took on the responsibilities in the short term of the executive producer of the radio show, and we changed the host from copyright to Sam Devine. And I then started to take on some of the label manager responsibilities. And then when the head of marketing left, I took on some of the marketing responsibilities for the label. And at this time, I was doing all of these jobs myself. You got to remember, on my own, in my own business, I was doing the mastering, the contracts, the artwork, the digital marketing plans, the release strategy, the plug-in, the club promotions. I'd kind of then taken that work ethic into Defected, and now I have about 15 people doing those jobs, but back then I was doing it on my own. And Simon and I had gone out to talk about that evolution of my role, and Simon asked me the question and said, what's your ambition? And I said, well, one day I'd like to run the company. And he said, well, what about now? So I said, okay. I started to tell this now. I didn't tell it for a while because I was like so nervous. The first thing I did that night when I went home and had accepted the role of managing director was I went and took out an insurance policy that if I was fired, that I would be paid. Because I was nervous. I just come from a background where it was like economic 7-year cycles. I'm like, all right, I've probably got 7 years here, and then I'm going to have to find something else to do.
Okay, March 2020, in your words. I know a little bit about it, but tell us why you decided it was right to come up with a virtual festival to bring people together at this most important time. It wasn't the obvious move. It was a first move for many. Tell us about that time.
I have a very simple mantra: be better than the person you was yesterday. I'm not competitive, really. I'm just trying to be better than we are to kind of continue to serve a purpose. Music industry is full of egotistical narcissists, and I like to consider myself, as Matthew McConaughey would say, an egotistical utilitarian, which is a term that I've started to coin recently because my purpose is to help others. That's how I massage my own ego. We then, year on year, from 2017 through to 2019, had been growing on a steady trajectory as a business. And then COVID happened, and the handbrake on everything had been pulled rather dramatically. I remember sitting at home off the back of a call with yourself and Simon and Tom Coxhead, and just thinking, like, at the time I thought it was 3 to 6 weeks that we were going to be locked up, and it's like, can't just do nothing. We have to do something. And we started a virtual festival run, and that went on to do 50 plus shows every Friday, reaching tens of millions of people. But during COVID...
What's interesting there is, A, that was very much your idea start point, throwing you into a WhatsApp group on a Sunday night. But there's a selflessness that drove that idea. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Exactly that. I mean, it was just a case of, people are going to have nothing to do. We didn't know that it was going to go on for so long. Thought it was going to be 6 weeks. That was bad enough, let alone like 18 months. And it was purely a case of, how do we help people? And then it became more of how do we help people? And when we started getting messages as that was going along, that people, were thanking us for doing it on a Friday because they knew it was a Friday, because they didn't know what day of the week it was while they were working at home. Giving people that little bit of light through an otherwise very dark time, it made it all worthwhile. Forget the numbers and forget the success. It was all about people's mental health and keeping them occupied.
But there's a thread through lots of your start point, and I want to go back to that pivotal moment again in a second. But the selflessness, charity has always been a thing. I think there was a couple of $1 million raised for the COVID relief fund around that time. Like, there's an altruism that feels like it's existed throughout. Your management style is quite famously arms round shoulder. It's not that it's a soft approach, but is that you?
It's just natural. From a young age, for as far back as I can remember, I'm an oldest child, and my mum always was like, you're responsible for your siblings. I come from an old school background, right? So excuse what I'm about to say, but it's like, you're the man of the house. It's that kind of mentality. And even with my wife, I am the breadwinner and she's the homemaker. It was like that. That's by our choice. That's what works for the two of us.
Support and giving. Yeah. And another thing with you and your story is, on one sense, you're a Deutsche Bank, super organized, synthesizing data, looking at numbers, reading, operations. But you've got craft, creativity, you've got listening skills, A&R ability, spotting talent. Then you're flipping to promotion. What on earth are you?
I don't know. I actually think the question is you said you are, and then you lifted those things. I think I was and I think that I'm quite happy to close a chapter and start a new one. I'm not afraid of that.
Do you feel restless if you don't?
Yeah, I think probably actually, because the next thing that happened from COVID, whilst being managing director and doing all this kind of charity work, was that talking about people's mental health being challenged. Simon's mental health was challenged, and by his own accounts, the world had changed. And I don't want to speak for him, but he was quite clear that COVID had raised questions to him that he hadn't perhaps been thinking about before. And then he started to think about what life would be like if he cashed out and sold the business. I guess to your point, with my kind of mentality is, I obviously didn't want anyone else to acquire the business, but I used my finance background and my contacts to ultimately raise the funds and do a management buyout.
Which is no small feat. And again, you speak out about it because you have a humble manner, full stop. You speak about that with a certain normality, but that isn't that normal.
No.
Not when you consider where you started.
Yeah.
You were sending the music to the guy whose company you eventually orchestrated the buyout to enable him to... There's a set of levers there that don't come naturally to a lot of people.
No, because of my kind of be better than the person who was yesterday, I just every day I'm just thinking about, where we're at and how we improve. So I don't really stop and think about those things, We're here and we continue, and I'm now taking the dual responsibilities of CEO and chairman. That's the story.
So you're sat here today as CEO and chairman. Let's just go back a touch. There's a heartbreaking moment in there that felt completely pivotal in your life, and you describe it as such, and losing your brother. Was it very clearly his loss that drove you to walk straight back into your passion and live your life properly?
I don't think I could articulate in words the loss of my brother and what he meant to me. I don't think I can even to this day express it, that absence that created. I would look at myself in the mirror every morning and just, even today, I still do it. Not as painfully as I did, but there's not a day in the morning or a day that goes by that I don't think about him, but certainly not a morning. Usually the first glance of myself in the mirror is a memory of that. And
do you think that manifests in drive then? And I don't mean to bring the two together as such, but there feels...
There's a few things. My dad broke his back and became disabled in 1993, couldn't work again, was the breadwinner. He had his own business, and overnight, I was 13 years old, we went from having, multiple cars and caravan and holiday homes to not even having 50p to go to youth club. Actually, I think the original drive was my mum giving me the responsibility as the eldest child, because I was captain of the football team and I was prefect and house captain, and I had all those responsibilities. And then the drive from my dad, and then the drive from having the promotional responsibilities and being a young father, I should say, probably first and foremost. And then my brother dying, that was just like a compounding.
Would you say you almost had no choice with the work ethic that you've always had? This relentless restlessness of new, but there's something of the run there. It's not an escape and it's not fear, but
I think it is fear, actually. I think it's fear. I've tried to understand it myself, but I think fear of losing everything, whether that's finances, family, someone, or being the reason for the pain.
And because you've witnessed.
And because I know what that feels like, I don't want to experience that again. I don't want other people to experience it again. And perhaps that is the root of it all. And but it's so far buried beneath layers of responsibility that I don't even give it a second thought.
Perhaps deliberately, or rather subconsciously.
Yeah.
You tell it almost funny within the anecdote of the first thing you did when you were offered the job to run the business was take out insurance. This, again, it feels laced with the multiple kind of skill set, multi-hyphen individual that you are. I would go, gosh, I've got imposter syndrome, and walk in. You go, I'm going one further than that, and I'm insuring the whole thing, so I make sure I would never lose out. Like, that's the difference.
I had two things that reoccur in psychological for me. One is that, to answer your question about, the leaving of the financial institution, was I just looked at myself in the mirror one day and thinking about my brother and thought, what would 80-year-old Wes say? I was like, if I asked him this question now, should you make this jump, take this jump, what would he say? So of course he's going to say yes. He's going to look back at you and say, well, what have you got to lose? You never know. Like, rather try and foul than not try at all.
And what about now? What's 80-year-old Wes?
80-year-old Wes actually, firstly, he would definitely say that I'd made the right decision. But I don't know. Who knows what comes next?
And what about your brother?
He'd be proud, like super proud.
Would he love it?
Yeah, he would love it. He would love the experiences, yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. Let's talk a little bit about music. The story of Defected, there's some really interesting parts. For starters, you're describing a business strategy that I'd never heard that was almost rebirthed or reworked on the strength of one record, Cola, that you signed. That felt like it had a huge impact. You remodeled a business based on the fact that you could, or you had the confidence.
I wouldn't put all of the credit on the one record. I think Defected started in 1999, so by 2017 it had 18 years of catalogue and many anthems in the house space, some number ones, like it had top 20 records, top 40 records globally. But I think that it was more of a eureka moment in a kind of changing world.
In a changing era. And music has changed 2 or 3 times.
Defected had its own struggles during the physical to digital era and the rise of anti-piracy. But streaming had kind of started to kill anti-piracy. And it hasn't killed it, but it certainly was less of a problem all of a sudden, because you were monetizing records that you couldn't monetize or weren't monetizing before. And you start to see a spike in a record because of whatever reason, that actually was people were starting to get paid again for a record that had just kind of declined significantly. So the Cola moment was a number of events leading to the same point. And that was change of evolution from downloads to streaming, the ability to reach a global community and a global audience largely through Spotify, Facebook at the time, Instagram was growing, and YouTube, and the evolution of social media. And then you had a record that was able to stitch it all together, something that you could actually use to tap into all of those. So,
and people tried to explain again in perhaps layman's terms, people tried to buy the rights effectively of that record for a decent sum of money, and you said no?
As an independent record label that Defected is, you had competition still have competition
Yeah.
from the majors, right? So what would typically happen, I don't know, take a record, the previous records just before that was like Lee Walker Freak Like Me as an example, becomes a big underground anthem, then it crosses over, then it has commercial appeal, and then Ministry of Sound come in as part of the Sony ecosystem and license it for the UK. And then they would essentially pay us an advance on royalties to then take that record into their ecosystem and work it alongside us collectively. And then ultimately they have the rights to exploit the record, right?
And historically, that would be the normal.
That was the model.
At best, you go, of course,
Yeah.
that's fine. We take a bit of money, but off it goes.
I mean, Defected had been doing that for a long time, and it was a revenue stream for the company. But all of a sudden, the world had changed, and you could reach a global audience, which you didn't have that confidence before. I always say about trust the process, right? That's another one of the things that I often say, and it's like, actually, when bad things happen, they usually good comes from them, and it's very difficult. Death of my brother led to positive things in my life, although I would swap it in a heartbeat, by the way, to have him back.
Of course.
You have to take those moments on.
Agree. What's particularly interesting, and your understanding of a record label like it, again, industry-wise, you've gone from vinyl and CD into digital downloads and things called MP3s. And the point is, there's been so many turns of that wheel, but this brand that you are chairman, CEO of right now, that people wear on T-shirts around the world. Is it something in the storytelling of that brand? Is that something you're just always aware of? Whatever the technology is, we're on this world of AI now. Does brands still matter? Does it matter more than ever?
For us, it still matters, and it matters more than ever. Simon Dunmore did an amazing job at creating the brand.
Agreed.
And right up until 2017, he pretty much did that on his own. And then from 2017 onwards, the culture of the company had been ingrained into every individual that worked in that organization, was there for the same purpose, the why. And then from COVID, when Simon started to, I don't want to call it struggle because it's not fair for me to speak on his behalf in that sense, but once he started to ask questions of the continuation, I think that was the moment that the responsibility kind of started to shift a little more onto myself and some of the other leaders in the company, and then through the management buyout continued. But the red thread there is community. The reason why Defected and Glitterbox have established themselves as the brand they are is they started off as a brainchild of Simon Dunmore with a mentality to look after the community that has been continued by the people that work for the organisation, and that includes me now at the helm. We have a duty of care to ensure that the people and our fans have good experiences, that they're able to consume good media through records and the radio show, that we're shining a light of positivity to people in challenging times and environments, and that we continue.
It's held up as such. I've been in case studies in advertising festivals where Defected's hold up, and it's about that kind of the way they curate community. I think what's particularly interesting is there's moments that I've heard within the story that are born from necessity. So you mentioned the virtual festival, the pandemic, and how actually it was your decision on a whim on a Sunday night to do something for those fans, which is altruistic comms, and I've never thought about it like that before. I didn't realize that Simon perhaps dreamt those up initially because he was a bit frustrated that there weren't enough Defected records playing at a festival, so he thought of putting on his own. Was that right?
Defected was born as a label in 1999, and first and foremost, we are still a record label.
Yeah.
And music is at the front and centre of everything that we do. Started to put on shows, DJ himself, started to put on shows 2 years later, Ibiza residency, small shows in Ministry of Sound. Even through to the early 2010s, there would only be quite modest activity. Ibiza residency, some UK residencies, some festival presence. Excluding Ibiza, back in when I started in the company in 2014, I think we were doing about 20-ish events a year on top of Ibiza. In 2023, we did 400 events. Wow. We're back to around about 160 events a year now because we've taken a bit more of a quality over quantity.
Huge amount of people through the doors though, isn't it?
It's 1 million tickets a year.
Wow, 1 million actual paying customers per year. Or is it all about escapism and being cathartic in the world around them?
Since post-COVID, 2021, to the 5 years to this summer, we've actually put on 1,033 events that are not Ibiza, right? And of those 1,033 events, 951 of them have sold out. Of the 70, 80-ish that have not sold out. Probably the majority of those have occurred in the last 2.5 years. And what's happened since then, there have been venues closed and the nightlife industries have struggled, and there's been the war in Ukraine started, and that created a 10+% increase in inflation, which meant supplier costs and energy costs all increased, and then people didn't have the money and staffing was cut, and then all of a sudden we're in another cycle of that activity going on. And what you've seen is people getting squeezed harder and harder and harder. So even though they want to go out, not everybody can afford to do all the things that they used to be able to do. Like you and I are of a similar age. We could go out and get in free before 10 o'clock or 11, or, you buy a ticket and there might be a drink included, or you just bunk the train, smoke in the club, drink a bottle of water. It was wasn't expensive. Now everything's expensive. The appetite, I think, is still there, but people are having to look at alternatives. And even though subscription services are great, it's easy to stay in and watch Netflix with a bottle of wine or whatever.
Is it a threat? Do you worry about, beyond your business, do you worry about the wider scene in that respect?
Yeah, I do actually. And I ask myself the question quite a lot. We're fortunate because we have a following and a brand and a fan base. I absolutely do not take that for granted. But I'm looking at all these partners who we've worked with over the years that have gone out of business, or that are struggling or not able to sell out events. And I'm wondering, is young people's appetite shifting because of their financial ability to experience, same with football, by the way, or are their tastes changing because of the accessibility of information?
I'm finding a duality within sport, even with my son, a teenager whose away days in football is his greatest moments of his life, but the absolute duality of the contentment with which the rest of his life can be seemingly enriched in his head through the screen. In other words, those two things can coexist. But I agree, there's this desire and yearning for the physical moment, getting you goosebumps, the roar of a crowd. But if that's not easily accessible, that's a concern, isn't it?
What was your old saying was a fish and chip paper, right? It's the fish and chip paper media, and it's throwaway. And if they don't entirely love something, they can move on from it, or they're trying to consume so much in one go. It's like, what about you just enjoy the one thing? And it's that's something that is being questioned right now. And I find myself being guilty of it, right? I'm a West Ham fan, as the world knows, and it's awful watching them sometimes. Sometimes it's amazing, but I still go back.
But in a way, maybe it's that we cling on to, and why these festivals and these moments and these events will keep going, and people will find enough money to one festival a year or one show a year,
And this is where, talk about the duty of care, right? When we curate our lineups, we always like to try to make sure, firstly, that the music policy is very clear, right? We're a house music brand. Defected is a house label. We release house music and we play house music at our events. And Glitterbox is contemporary house and disco. And in both brands, in their own kind of lanes, they both have to balance out the musical offering. So I like to have an OG and a current tastemaker and a resident and a developing act. And as long as the music policy is good and the DJs understand it, then we have a good show. And it's all about the product and the offering. You have to put out good records. You have to throw good parties.
And the parties have different altitudes as well. I've been to some of your shows as a fan again last summer in Ibiza, and it's a show, it's a spectacle, it's confetti and it's glitter and it's lighting and the music's insane. But there's other versions, it's like, this is wicked, sweaty, small, dark club with the best tunes you've ever heard from Luke Solomon.
Or you get the Croatia, paradise environment, and you need to factor in the club environment and the festival environment and make sure that we continue to offer a good offering. I remember you and I did the panel with Google on Defected, and before we spoke, Gary Neville did his panel. I don't know if you remember this.
Yeah.
And Gary Neville said, one of the things Alex Ferguson said to the team was that he wanted the fans to be happy. That was his primary focus was,
that's great.
I want the fans to be happy. And in order to get the fans happy, Manchester United needed to play good football and win.
That's great.
And I want our fans to be happy. So we need to put on good events and we need to deliver good records. Nowadays, the social media output also needs to accompany that to keep the brand at the forefront.
That's really interesting. I was going to ask about how you divvy your time. You've got records here. You've got, presumably, you're being played stuff all the time, sent stuff all the time. And then here you've got parties and events. And how many did you say you're doing this year?
Well, it would be about 160 to 180, yeah.
And I know you, and you tend to have your fingers still continuous. It's not like you're just sat in an ivory tower waiting to be presented with a dashboard. You're the polar opposite. How do you split that time?
I've got a really good team around me, and actually now as I've evolved into a CEO and chairman role, which has enabled me to focus a lot more on the vision and strategy, but also the development of the leadership team. And then we have our events business has undergone a number of changes recently, and we've rebuilt the team. Yeah, I am still way more involved than I probably should be at this
Do you think
level.
you'll always be?
I don't know, because I'm not a micromanager.
No.
But I like to have my fingerprints on.
But it comes back to your multi-hyphenate manner in that you understand every single part. I've never known a brain to be able to dissect the streaming number, to the 0, 1 decimal at exactly the same point, to be able to cast opinions so eloquently about brand and creative and craft. That's a strange mix, a bloody talented one. And you wrote like a 90-page manifesto, right? I don't think I ever knew this.
Yeah.
Come on, tell us. That feels quite Jerry Maguire.
What it was, I actually started to write it for one of my business partners to really understand the deeper purpose. It became something I thought, you know what, I'll finish this and share it with staff so that staff understand, have a reference point more than anything. But the purpose of that, shall we say, the passing of knowledge, is the evolution, right? House music today is not what it was in its origins, but the purpose is still there. I feel like in order to educate the next generation and for them to understand that and then use it for their own is something that's really important. I think Defected has a responsibility to educate people on the history of house music, but also to understand how house music should be in the current time. Trends, right? They come and go. And another analogy is like the house music ecosystem. It's like a pendulum swaying, right? And there's like a circle in the middle that is house music. And it goes from very cool underground headsy vibes into very commercial vocal sounding songs. And it sways backwards and forwards. And we just have to be true to house music right in the center. So this pendulum sways, and when it goes away from you, you need to hold your nerve and accept the choppy waters and wait for it to come back. It's
Does that to do with authenticity? Because if you don't, if you yourself alter the tone.
Think about the pendulum, right? If you follow the pendulum, what are you doing? You're always just one step behind. You're never in front of the pendulum, right? So the reason that we do that is to help people understand why. It's not about the changes of the ecosystem of the market or the trends coming and going. It's not about those things. It's about who we are, why do we exist, and why are we continually to focus on this.
I love
it's a Simon Sinek thing, right? People they don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it.
Was it based on something? Because he's fabulous at doing that.
The two things, one, that and The Infinite Game. Two Simon
really?
Sinek books was The Infinite Game and It All Starts With Why. Both of those completely resonated with me.
Yeah.
I mean, Simon was always massively into Seth Godin, and Seth Godin wrote a lot about community and marketing. Simon Sinek was that to me, and it was about understanding the why.
The clarity of the story that you're telling when you're understanding the why, I love how that's so impervious to change. We're now firmly in an AI era. What are your thoughts? Is it about staying true in the center of your pendulum swing? How are you feeling about that?
I'm a realist, and let's be honest, right? The evolution of technology. Once upon a time, TVs were black and white, then they were color, then they were HD. Technology, social media platforms, social interaction, payment methods, cash to digitized money to cryptocurrency, like evolution in every single thing, right? So AI, it's all going to be dependent on how you use it and how you embrace it. Of course, there will be automation that will lead to the loss of jobs, and that's the biggest fear for a lot of people. But also, I think that there'll be new business opportunities created to help boost their economies that hopefully will create new opportunities and new jobs. I think the young generations, like my son is now, if I think about his attitude towards it, it's not great. He's 23, And a lot of his generation are trying to find jobs that are not going to be replaced by AI. So that's an immediate mentality. It's different for that generation and your son's generation than it is for us, who have had careers and have positions and experience. We will be using AI as a tool to help improve the processes, the automation, but we won't be using it for discovery and things we don't really understand. And the danger of the young generations is that they could use it for things that they don't understand without ever really understanding it at all.
Do you think there's a chance there might be a creative renaissance for the individual to spend time with this machine that is trained to know them even better, and for creativity to flourish? Or am I being a bit too hopeful?
No, I think the pros and cons and the risks and opportunities that you talk about there is, like, on one hand, you're going to have people that are automating the production elements of songs. A well-documented situation last year where a big dance record had been seen to be promoting and marketing itself off the back of an alternative artist's sound. And, you know, things like that are problematic and hugely questionable and not right. But then there's also the ability that someone has great song ideas that can't sing, that could write a song that AI can translate, that then perhaps a real person could actually perform, that could mean that creativity and art is actually seen and heard. Of course, there's a huge risk to business. The market has already seen an increase in the number of songs per day from 100,000 to like 140,000 a day. It's seen a significant increase, and there has been AI records penetrating the charts. But to a reaction to that, you've had the major labels adopting certain policies, and the stores, like from Apple to Traxsource and others, that are installing a kind of policy. In the same way as somebody may use a studio engineer, I think if they use AI for the right reasons to help to improve and expand their own ideas and to automate processes, I think that's acceptable.
And do you think we'll be seeking more, if you like, provenance, evidence of the human beneath it? Are we going to want more humans behind it and the story of that human and how they came up with the record? Is there going to be a return to the PR of the person, the story of their origins? Will we care more?
I think so. The equal opposite reaction that I mentioned before, like, no press is bad press attitude that I kind of have. It's like, there's a criticism of AI, so hopefully what that will mean is that certain musicians will be more creative and create more art that's contradicting or complementing the problem. That's the way I like to hope that what we're going to see here, because people are not happy about it. What do? You just complain about it or do something about it, right? I actually think that the rise in bands has coincided significantly with this. I'm seeing a lot more musicians, once again, really interesting, creative musicians that are singer-songwriters playing instruments. You might see an increase in acoustic activity.
Last year was a great example of that. Jamie Webster in Liverpool and the Lathams. It was almost like a away day style culture in different cities and towns, in the north of England especially, and people loving the local accents and where they're from. I think, again, that seeking, I agree, that reaction or seeking out the origins will be interesting. Maybe there's something lovely there. You've sort of said so much about this very pure piece of thinking, wherever the pendulum swings, whatever the technology, whatever the state of the world, that we still resonate with what's true. House music for you is that. The brand, the sound, the tonality, the artists, the DJs, your fans, your community. It stayed true throughout. And I kind of love that. And it gives me hope in this new era again, that pillar is still sound and that we still gravitate towards what's real and what matters the most. Wes Saunders, this has been fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this week's show, please follow us on Instagram @StoryCoPod. Subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. It really does help. StoryCo is a Telltale Industries production, recorded in Studio One at the brilliant TYX Studios in King's Cross. Produced by Jago Lee, assistant produced by Nellie Batt, edited by Ryan O'Meara. Special thanks to Craig Heptonstall, Jack Freegard, Tyler Newton, and Issa Gibson. I'm James Kirkham. This has been a masterclass in how storytelling pays in this modern media landscape. Go out, tell a story that matters. We'll see you next week.